Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. I'm joined, as I am every week, by Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and to have our viewers and listeners kindly joining us.
Yeah, great to be back to talk to you about the latest developments in the presidential race. Especially from a libertarian perspective. Big news. I mean, Gary Johnson is soaring in the polls. He's received the endorsement of major newspapers, the Detroit News, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, a couple of days ago, the Chicago Tribune. I mean, this is phenomenal. I mean, when did you ever think you'd see the day when a mainstream newspaper, big mainstream newspapers, would be endorsing the Libertarian Party candidate for president? But they all seem to be taking the same line, that Johnson reflects their values. His libertarianism reflects their values. I mean, this is really a sea change in terms of libertarianism, Richard. I mean, 30 years ago when you and I first met, and we were discussing libertarianism, we were a lonely bunch, the libertarian movement. And here it's come to the point where even mainstream newspapers are endorsing the Libertarian Party candidate. And then the second development that we'll talk about also is the millennial support for Johnson. The New York Times reported that in its most recent poll, you've got about 25% of people from 18 years of age to 29 years of age that are now committed to voting for Johnson. I mean, this is phenomenal. And the final thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to you, is that this obviously has caused this big reaction among the left. I mean, you've got this left-wing panic because, as it turns out, the polls are reflecting that Johnson is pulling more from Clinton than from Trump. And so you've got the spectacle now after election cycle after election cycle where the left has just ignored the Libertarian Party. Now they're actually going on the attack with editorials and op-eds and stuff as to why the young people are better off voting for Hillary than going with Gary Johnson. So this is a big, I think, a reflection of how much libertarianism has grown among the American people. What do you think?
Well, I'll agree. I'll just start off by saying that I agree with you, but if I can sort of put the complimentary slant to it, I would suggest that it's not really or per se how many people view themselves as libertarian in an understanding of what a classic liberal or libertarian position really represents. Domestic policy, foreign policy, the notion of the relationship between government and the individual, as to show the bankruptcy and the corruption and the general disgust and disapproval of people concerning the two major political parties as represented by the personalities that they have respectively put up for the presidency this year. The fact is that the media has pointed out that there has never been such a high level of disapproval reflected in people's opinions about both political candidates in a presidential election for as long as they've recorded these things. 62% disapproval, 65% disapproval. These are the ranges for both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The people are just rejecting as unattractive, undesirable, and misguided both candidates, both in terms of their personalities and their histories, as well as what comes out of their mouths in terms of the occasions when they talk about policies rather than trashing each other, which seems to be the focus of their respective campaigns. But having said that, there is no doubt that precisely because of people's disappointments and frustrations with the choices offered to them by the two major parties, they have looked at what are the options, either to stay home, which I presume some might, or is there a third candidate that would more positively reflect a refreshing view, a less corrupted view, a less hypocritical view of someone who at least would talk about they want to change the system in ways that seem to reflect greater fairness, justice, less intrusiveness into people's lives. And it's that searching for something other than Clinton or Trump that has made people pay attention to a degree that has not been the case in the past in presidential elections, at least certainly not with the Libertarian Party, to look in this direction. Now, what they have discovered, what they have seen, is a candidate who at least talks in ways and represents policies, even if they don't totally agree with him, that seems more in line with their general views of where they want the country to move. Now, having said that, within the Libertarian Party and within the Libertarian movement, there are differences of view. How effective is Gary Johnson? How consistently principled in articulating the policy views is Gary Johnson? But I believe, from a more pragmatic point of view, his tempered tone, his coming across as someone who understands people's frustrations and wants to offer sort of a libertarian-oriented policy direction, as opposed to seeming to come across, this is it, A, B, C, and D, and in an equally sort of dogmatic tone. The result of his sort of milder tone and seeming to have sort of an aw shucks personality, let's think about it, and how can we solve the problems without relying upon big government? That has made, I think, his alternative far more attractive to people this year than in the past.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, obviously that a lot of the support comes from just the deep antipathy that have been generated by Clinton and Trump. I mean, people just don't like them. And so obviously a lot of the support for Johnson comes through that. But I think there's something more going on here, because when Clinton appears before these young people and she goes on to these universities and stuff and is trying to garner their vote, she's trying to convince them, hey, don't go for Johnson, go for me. She's unable and unwilling to go in there and talk about the things that matter to her the most. The killing in the Middle East. I mean, there's nothing she would love more than to keep killing people in the Middle East. She's an interventionist. She loves foreign intervention. She loves all the death and destruction, or she doesn't mind it. It's like a cost of doing business for her in terms of regime change operations and assassinations and what she did in Libya and her support of the Iraq intervention, her support of sending troops back into Iraq, the Syria thing. She doesn't talk about those things before young people because she's smart enough to realize the average young person's likely to say, what's in this for us? Why should we be in favor of all this death and destruction? I mean, and look, she wants a no-fly zone over Syria. Do you think she's going to be talking about that in front of these young people? Because that means possible war with Russia. And if a war breaks out with Russia that is not nuclear, or even if it is, you're talking about a major draft here, where these young people are going to be seized, ordered to a military installation for training, and sent in one of these endless foreign wars to die. Now, the young people are into life. I mean, when you're young, all you're thinking about is, hey, what am I doing with my life and what's ahead? And you're not thinking about death and destruction. You're not interested in death and destruction. And so the fact that she can't go in there and tell these young people, this is what I believe in, is very revealing. Secondly, the drug war. She is a big promoter of the drug war. She loves it. She loves all the arrests and the incarceration. I mean, she's been one of the biggest supporters of the drug war, as long as she's been in political office. Why is that something attractive to young people? I mean, many of them smoke dope. Why would they favor somebody getting up there saying, if I catch you, I'm going to send you to jail for 20 or 30 years?
Right.
So I think a lot of young people are figuring this out. Now, Trump's obviously no different. I mean, he favors the drug war. He favors the war in the Middle East. There are the wars in the Middle East. So where does Hillary end up talking? What does she end up saying to these young people? She uses the old strategy that has always worked on old people. I'm going to give you free tuition if you vote for me, free college, free this, the same way they do in Latin America when Latin American public officials are running for office. I'm going to give you candy, they promise everybody. It's just a bribe. I'm offering you this if you vote for me. Well, young people are sitting there now. That old people love that. I mean, hey, give me more Social Security, give me more Medicare, and I'll vote for you. But young people are sitting there, I think, saying, this doesn't make any sense. Nothing's free. How's it going to be paid? Well, they're figuring out that I think that their parents, that means higher taxes for their parents because the government doesn't have any free money. So somebody's got to fund that tuition, and that means taxes, which means higher taxes on their parents. Or when they graduate from college, it means more money taken out through withholding to fund all these freebies. I think there might be more going on here than meets the eye. I think young people might be figuring out all this political tripe that has come with the welfare warfare state, and that maybe they don't want to have any part of it.
Well, I think that also, complementing your point about what does Hillary say to the younger potential voters, is that last week or so, this audio came out of a talk that she was giving somewhere and was basically being sarcastic and condescending towards potential younger voters. Oh, they just want free tuition. They don't realize that nothing comes free, and they all live in their mother's basement. I mean, sort of like they're just bums who just don't go and get jobs or can't get jobs and just live off their parents. That's a very ridiculing and condescending view of the very constituents that you're hoping to get support from. The fact is that the points that you raised, the foreign interventionism, the civil liberty issues of being able to drink and smoke what you want, and then this idea of just she has nothing to offer them other than I will either give you free tuition to go to college, or it will be heavily subsidized, or part of your debt will be wiped out through some other government program. She basically has nothing to offer than the old Roman method of keeping the masses loyal, and that is bread and circuses. There's nothing else. Now, Trump, as you said, is not much better. I mean, clearly the younger potential voters, they're in vast numbers put off by Trump. Though, to be honest, either Gary Johnson or Trump could take her to task for her own hypocrisies on a number of other issues. The Clinton campaign has attempted to make a lot out of that. It now has been revealed that because of this almost $1 billion tax write-off back in the mid-1990s, Donald Trump may have paid no income taxes for like over a decade. And, he said, well, that's just being smart. I'm a smart businessman. And now she ridicules him. We're paying taxes. He's not. Excuse me, either Trump or Gary Johnson can take her to task and say, Mrs. Clinton, other than maybe working briefly for a law firm when you first graduated out of law school, when have you earned anything as honest money in the private sector that has involved a tax contribution? You have been the wife of the governor of Arkansas. You have been the first lady of the president of the United States. You have been the senator of the great state of New York, and you have been secretary of state. During all of those decades, you lived off taxpayers' money. And if you say, but I and Bill paid taxes out of that. If taxpayers pay you a salary gross of $100 and you pay $20 back in taxes, on net, you've received $80 of a transfer from all the honest, hardworking private citizens who've had to pay taxes off which you've lived. You are a tax moocher, Mrs. Clinton. You are a tax bum, Mrs. Clinton. You are even worse than Donald Trump, Mrs. Clinton. Now, that's what either Trump or Gary Johnson should bring out. Because the point is, she is a a welfare bum. She's lived off the state for all these decades, either herself or through her husband. She's a welfare queen who's lived in public housing for 8 years. That's what the White House is. Now, that's how she should be attacked, Jacob. Now, maybe I'm being too soft on her. Okay, obviously I'm being too soft on her. But that's how she should be. I mean, what a hypocrite, what a liar, what a manipulator. Do I sound critical? Oh, I don't know. But anyway, I mean, that's just the reality of her.
Well, you do sound a bit cynical, I mean, but maybe justified. I mean, look, you're absolutely right. She's lived off the public dole for many, many years. And, you know, they criticize Trump for taking advantage of tax loopholes where he presumably doesn't pay any taxes for a long period of time. But let me tell you something. Every one of his critics takes those deductions for his home mortgage payments. And he uses...
Of course.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just interject there. Now, when she says that about, we didn't pay. Now, does this mean that when Bill and Hillary have filled out their income tax forms each year, of course, with their army of professional tax accountants, and the tax accountant has said to them, well, Mr. and Mrs. Clinton, you could have deduction A, and you could have deduction B, and that would reduce your tax liability by Y. Did they say, no, we really need to pay more. We feel obligated to be one with the people. No, they took every conceivable deduction that the law allowed. And in his own way, the fact is, Trump did it himself. Assuming he didn't play any shenanigans, if he hasn't paid taxes for 10 years, it's because he did a big write-off, and the tax law permits it. So they do nothing different than he does. All that they couldn't do was to write off everything to have zero like he seems to have had. That's the only difference between them.
Absolutely. But look at their focus, Richard, that their entire focus is the funding of their welfare warfare state way of life.
Yeah,
and that's the whole thrust. That's why they want to get the economy going again, which means more people working to fund their welfare warfare state machine. And that's all the way they view these young people. They view them as little drones that want them to enter the workforce so they can start paying taxes to fund their war machine in the Middle East and Africa and all the rest of the world, and fund their welfare machine. And notice that this is one of the funny things about this thing. Now, you're right. Johnson is not the most consistent, purest libertarian you'll ever find. Mm-hmm. But what they're doing, the left, is going up and digging up what libertarians stand for, which is fantastic. I mean, it's like free advertising for us. And so that one of them brought up, well, libertarians want to abolish Social Security. And I don't think that's Johnson's position, which it should be his position. But the libertarian position is, yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. But they think, because it's worked so well with old people that, we're going to abolish Social Security. Oh, my gosh, don't vote for him. And they've always pulled this on Republicans. They're going to take your Social Security away. Well, that might well not be working with the millennial crowd, because the millennial crowd sits there and says, okay, and so what? Because
exactly,
they're not looking ahead 40 years. They're the ones whose money is being taken from them. They're figuring out there is no fund. It's not a retirement account where the baby boomers generation had their money put away in a fund. That's what the boomers say. Oh, well, I had my money taken from me. I'm just getting it back. Well, they're not getting it back. They're taking it from the millennials. And so the millennials are figuring this out and saying, abolish Social Security? Okay. That doesn't sound too bad, because now there's no more FICA, no more withholding. Right. All of a sudden you don't have an income tax and a Social Security tax. Why is that not in the interest of young people? And I mean, for example, Richard, if let's say that the young person today is 25, over the next 20 years, he's going to pay $20,000 on average, his family, in taxes. And that's probably a low estimate. In 20 years, that's $400,000 in savings he could have if he goes with libertarianism, as compared to what they have today. So all their scare tactics, they may not be working this time.
Right, and the thing is that what people like Johnson should be doing on this very issue is use the government's own data. earlier this year, I did an article. We ran it on the FFF website. I'm forgetting the title I used, but it was in December, and it was called "There Is No Social Security Santa Claus," and the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. This is a group of economists hired by the Republicans and the Democrats. They're just the number cruncher policy wonks who grind out, if this is the legislation and this is the demographics, what is it going to cost government in terms of expected tax revenues, and what is the expenditures going to be, and is there going to be a gap of unfunded liability? In December, the CBO did a study based upon the Social Security Trust Fund, and what they showed is that by 2030, okay, which is not that far away, it's already 2016. By 2030, unless Social Security taxes are raised or the retirement eligibility age is increased, or some combinations of these things, or benefits are lowered, okay, by 2013, there will not be enough money coming in to Social Security to meet all current obligations under current legislation. And in fact, the CBO said that by 2030, when these young people are really going to be out there working and having to start thinking about how they're going to plan their own retirement 15, 20 years from now, that if you were going to get $100 under the Social Security eligibility in 2029, in 2030, according to their projection, that would have to be lowered to $72. You hear that? That's almost a 30% cut in what you get. Why? Because there's no money. But you say, but what about all of these surpluses that Social Security had in previous years? Wasn't it in the lockbox waiting for me? No. Uncle Sam took those surpluses and took it out and used it to cover its annual budget deficits as part of the cost of covering spending that taxes wasn't covering in those earlier periods. And all they put was their own little IOU promise to pay. But they can't promise to pay other than to tax us to pay back the money that they borrowed from themselves out of our Social Security surpluses. And the fact is, there is no money. And these people, the millennials, they're facing a future in which either they have to work longer to be eligible, or their own Social Security taxes are going to go up, or they're going to be stuck with lower benefits or some combination of those. And therefore, they'll discover that this is a Ponzi scheme, and they should be told that now, so that they would see the benefit for themselves in their 20s or even early 30s to want to opt out of the system and have government get out of the Social Security business. So as you were just saying, that they could take some equivalent money that's being siphoned off from them today by the Social Security tax, and if they chose to put it into private investment accounts and be much more comfortable when they reach their golden years than they'll ever have with the federal government.
Absolutely. This is what Americans did before Social Security. They saved their own nest egg. They got to keep everything they earned, and they were saving large amounts of money, which were forming the capital that was raising standards of living for people. But look, Richard, when you put Social Security and consider it as part of the whole welfare warfare state, which it really is, it's just another program, that government expenditures are already far exceeding the revenues. We see that with the mountain of debt. And this is the message that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and all these other pro-Social Security people are saying to young people. Don't worry about the enormously high level of taxes you're paying. Okay, so you're living in the basement of your parents into your 20s and 30s. So what if you can't make ends meet? So what if you can't start a family or buy a house? This is the promise that we give you, that when you get old, you're going to be able to do the same thing to young people living at that time. I mean, how is that an attractive argument? And notice the other prong of this argument. What Clinton and her ilk and Trump and the rest of them are saying to young people is, the reason we have to force you to care for your parents and seniors in general is because you can't be trusted to do that on your own. You will never do this on a voluntary basis. You're bad people. You're evil people. While libertarians are saying, we do trust you. We could abolish Social Security today. I got no question that most people are going to take care of their parents if it comes to that, or donate to charity when a legitimate charity needs the money. But that comes about as part of freedom and saying, well, I respect your freedom to choose, but I believe that most people would do the right thing. That lack of trust in people is communicated through the force of the liberal conservative welfare state, and the best example of that is Social Security, where they say we've got to force you to care for your parents because you're bad people who would not do so voluntarily.
Absolutely. And in fact, the fact is, to show how the government has locked itself into this, is that if you look at a pie chart of the government's budget in 2015, and what you find, Jacob, is that if you put in Social Security and add to it Medicare, Medicaid, and now what's emerging as Obamacare, and the interest on the public debt, right, the government's debt, that already, what are called the guaranteed entitlements plus interest on the debt, that represents already 66% of everything the government spends. The welfare state has swallowed up the federal government. The next largest component is, as I know you hammer away at, is the defense budget. But the point is that 50 years ago, like in the 1960s, the defense budget was almost 50% of everything the federal government spent. Today, the defense budget is about 20% to 25%, but 66% is the domestic welfare state. Between those entitlement programs and defense spending, everything we pay and then have to have as a debt to cover the deficit is just swallowed up by the government by entitlement or defense spending. This is an albatross around the country's neck.
Yeah, and it's hanging over young people. I mean, they've got to see that debt climbing and climbing. They see what's happened in Greece. They see what's happened in Puerto Rico. And let me tell you something, Richard, the government can get very nasty, very vicious when it needs money. I mean, in Argentina, they were seizing people's retirement accounts and then replacing them with bonds. For anybody that thinks the government wouldn't do that here, look at what they did with gold holdings. And gold was the official money of the American people under the Constitution, and government officials just went out and seized it, made it a felony offense to hold gold coins, which had been the official money of the American people. When they need the money to fund their wars and their welfare state, they will stop at nothing. And this is, I think, what a lot of young people are figuring out.
Yeah, this obviously would be an entire different subject, but related to exactly what you said. Another, example of the camel's nose in the tent is this push by a growing number of, quote, academics and some policy wonks that cash should be eliminated, that everything should be computerized money. Why do they want to eliminate cash? Because then there's no longer a way for you to have something real. Even our paper dollars, right, compared to just the ethereal, account in the computer, for us to be trying to siphon off and protect ourselves financially from the grasping hand of the government. If everything is just on the computers, then the government can just siphon it off and we can't do anything about it. But if we're able to put cash away, this is our money that we have somehow been able to set aside that we're keeping out of their grasping hand. The push against cash is connected to that grasping hand of the state.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let me make two final points. One is that, as you know, we live under a government that is really exercising dictatorial powers. The power to assassinate, the power to torture people, to round up Americans and put them into concentration camps. And I think that's a factor that people are considering with respect to Johnson, especially young people, that when you're living under a democratically elected dictator or a president that wields dictatorial powers, it's obviously in your interest to have a nice dictator, a person that's just a little bit more pleasant. And I think people are seeing that in Johnson as compared to Clinton and Trump, who are very, very vicious people. They would stop at nothing to use government powers to retaliate against enemies. And they look at Johnson and they see a plain old Joe who happened to be two-term president of New Mexico and saying, if I got to live under a dictator, I think I'd rather make it a nice one like Johnson.
Right.
And then I think also the other second point I wanted to make is the debate commission's really looking like idiots now, that they set this enormously high threshold for getting in the debates, which was obviously designed to prevent Johnson from getting into the debates, despite the fact that he's a former two-term governor and his running mate's a two-term governor of Massachusetts. But here's a guy where 60% of the American people are saying we want him in the debates. You've got major newspapers endorsing him. You've got tremendous amount of millennials, 1/4 of the millennials supporting him. And here he is being excluded from the debates. What a charade that is.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, Richard, on that note, we'll wrap it up.
All right.
So great to have you guys back with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Richard, enjoy the show, and I'll see you next week.
Until next time.